In this talk, we're going to discuss spiritual maturity using a comparison to the natural process of maturity. The purpose of this talk is to create some concrete ways to reflect on our spiritual condition. I'll start by establishing some definitions for natural maturity, and then we'll discuss what this can teach us about spiritual maturity. In life, a person naturally goes from a stage of being dependent on others to being abundant. And you'll see in a minute why I say abundant rather than independent. We'll represent this journey of growth with a spectrum in which maturity increases over time. At the immature end of the spectrum, we have a child, and at the mature end of the spectrum, we have an adult. And in between, connecting these two stages of life, there's a transitional stage we call adolescence. As we discuss different stages along this journey, we'll look at two aspects of a person's life. First, how do they eat? In other words, how are they nourished for growth? And second, how do they relate to others in their stage of development? In other words, how does this stage of their maturity affect others in the world? At the beginning end of the spectrum, a person starts life as a child. How is a child nourished for growth? Those of you who are around babies understand that when a human is first born, they really can't do anything for themselves. When it comes to eating, they must be fed. They literally need the food to be brought to their mouth. How does a child relate to others? They are completely dependent on the food and love they receive from adults. When someone is a child, others must take care of them, or they will not live to see the next stage of life. As the child continues to develop and mature toward adulthood, we eventually recognize a distinct stage of maturity called adolescence. What's distinct about it? Well, how is an adolescent nourished for growth? At this point, they no longer need the food to be brought to their mouths. In fact, you'd be insulting them to do that. They can and will feed themselves, especially teenagers. How do they relate to others? Adolescents are confident that they can take care of themselves. The final stage of maturity is that of an adult. What distinguishes an adult from an adolescent? For our purposes, I would submit to you that we recognize someone as an adult member of society when they are productive and contributing to others. That is to say, they not only know how to feed themselves, but they can and do feed others. And this actually answers our first question: how is an adult nourished for growth? Of course, an adult feeds themselves. They've been doing that since they were an adolescent. But having the responsibility of feeding others stretches them and causes them to mature. They leave adolescence behind in order to live a stable, disciplined life of self-giving. Adults are driven to become better learners, more creative, and more efficient so they can earn more and take care of others better. So in a very real sense, the adult is nourished for growth by learning to feed others. How does an adult relate to others? An adult has learned to take such good care of themselves that they also have the capacity to regularly take care of others, and they do this with growing confidence over time. Adults are defined by their ability to take care of others. This has tremendous implications for life, because if someone can take care of others, they can literally give life to others. And this is how life works. Every one of us can name adults who gave us life by feeding us when we were dependent. We can quite literally thank them for our life. So this is another distinguishing ability of adults, that they can provide for the needs of a child, and therefore they can reproduce life. So to summarize this model, maturity is a process where an individual grows from a stage in which they must take life from others to a stage in which they can give life to others. Now, what can we take away when considering our own spiritual maturity? First, I want to point something out. I said that adolescents are confident that they can take care of themselves. And this is true, but only as long as you provide them all the basic necessities of life. Because let's face it, whose food is the adolescent eating? It's food provided by somebody else. In other words, the adolescent can really only take care of themselves as long as an adult is controlling their environment and providing for their needs. Take the environment away, and an adolescent will struggle immediately. We see this in the church as well, when people get easily frustrated and leave saying, "I'm just not being fed," and their criticism is entirely directed toward the environment they experience. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't critique and reform our churches. Of course we need to improve our environments for people. What I am saying is that a certain consumer mindset reveals a lack of spiritual maturity. Consumers will always demand more and give less. A spiritual adult recognizes that they are a responsible part of the church, and so their approach to reforming the church is to contribute the change they want to see. This leader mindset is helpful, and it brings about positive change. Now, using this definition, if you are a spiritual adolescent, If you're someone who has not yet begun to help others grow spiritually, don't be afraid to do so. Taking care of others by investing our time for their benefit is how we grow. Many people get stuck in spiritual adolescence because they don't recognize the needs of others around them. Or if they do recognize them, they avoid the responsibility of caring for others until they feel capable of helping. Consequently, they spend much of their lives loving others sparingly. The point of this message is not go do more stuff or volunteer or try harder. Instead, you should be encouraged to know that all of life is a growth process. As you grow and mature spiritually, you will inevitably produce spiritual food for others. It's in your nature to nourish others, just like a growing plant produces nourishing food when it is fully alive. There's no need to feel guilty that you need to grow, because we all need to grow. So what is it we need to grow in? St. Paul wrote, "For the love of Christ impels us." Once we have come to the conviction that one died for all, he indeed died for all, so that those who live might no longer live for themselves. As we come to know God's love for us, it impels us to live life for others, so that they can experience the same kind of love. Living for others is what it means to live for Christ. Jesus said, "For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." Obviously, this is a paradox that we must grow into living. So this illustration is designed to help you begin considering where you are in the journey. When considering these 3 stages of maturity, there are 2 questions we should ask ourselves. Where am I, and where do I want to be?